So you really think you want to renovate a rural property? Hey, I'm just giving you a tiny little window into my life for the last year. What have I learned? What would I do differently next time? Hey, Howard here at 82 Maple, and boy have we had a fun last few days. This all started with a little adventure on Thursday morning, and it's now Tuesday afternoon. It started with the installer showing up with a pump to install in our little well. We've got a shallow well here. Don't worry, if you see some glimpses of the water down in here, that's not our well water at all. Our well is over here. That cavity is simply one to hold the pump. We have a 10-foot deep well with 4 feet of water in the bottom of it. According to the prior owner of this property, the pump you see down in there was at bare minimum over 20 years old. That didn't sit well with me. I don't want to have a pump failure in minus 20 in the middle of winter, and so we went to work to replace it. And the key word here is replace. As it turns out, the installer showed up with not a half-horse pump like I'd had before, but a 3/4 horse pump. 3/4 of a horse is always better than a half-horse, right? And there was a bunch of fittings that needed changing out. You'll see a mess of stuff here. The previous installation had old metal fittings. Wow, can you imagine? We had our house water coming through that stuff. Well, be that as it may, we went to work on this. So, pump went in, some new fittings went in, minus the expansion tank you see there, and flipped the breaker, just changed the wires off the old pump, put them onto the new pump, flipped the breaker, and it immediately blew. It was a 15 amp breaker. The pump is supposed to draw 15 amps regularly, but on startup takes a little more, so no mystery as to why it blew. Pump installer calls an electrician. The electrician came out, swapped some wires around in a panel, and we went for a 20 amp breaker. Now, a little fact, I did a little research. After that change to the 20 amp breaker, the wire was 14 gauge wire. It doesn't meet code when you put 14 gauge wire into a 20 amp breaker, but the electrician had over 30 years experience and probably thought it was an educated risk that he was taking because the pump isn't supposed to draw more than 15 amps. So we flipped the breaker, we had water, the plumber and the electrician congratulate each other, put their tools into their respective vehicles, and they're gone. And over the course of the next day, we blew the breaker. It tripped 3 times. The pump breaker tripped 3 times. So imagine my dilemma. We have a little guest suite on our little house, which is enjoying some shade today. And the guest suite is over on the right near the garage. One of our sons was visiting, 2 little grandchildren, and the breaker keeps tripping. It pretty much tripped most of the day, the next day when there was a call for water. And so phone call to the electrician. He suggests that he's not going to be available for a bit, but he will make a quick drop-in call. We take a look at it, and what's happening down there in the pump, on the pump controller down here, is that there's some electrical contacts in there, and every time we called for water, what was happening, and this came from the electrician whose first words out of his mouth on taking a close look at this, said, you know what, this entire installation I think was botched, Howard, because here's what's happening. I'm watching those contacts bouncing, and when the water pressure drops to 35 pounds, it calls for the pump to kick on. The pump comes on. It's 3/4 horse. We've increased the line from 3/4 of an inch to a full inch, and the pump is producing too much volume. It instantaneously generates 75 pounds or thereabout in pressure, which says, time to shut off, pump. It shuts off, realizes there's only 35 pounds, comes on, goes to 75, shuts off, comes back. It's doing that little rotation probably 2 times a second. The contacts in there are just bouncing. That can't possibly be healthy. So he says, shut her down, Howard. Don't use any water. Well, that makes me feel really good. We've had our hottest spell of 2022, and fortunately, the barn has a separate supply of water. Our animals are okay, and so we're living with this. We're now about 3 days deep. I'm skipping a whole bunch of the details here. And my plumber, the one that did the install, he's across Canada on the other side in the beginnings of a week-long vacation. I prevail on a neighbor, Bruce, who is a certified plumber. He's totally booked, wall to wall. This is going down Sunday morning, and he's booked wall to wall, and I say, look, we've got a big problem here. He says, well, let me stop by and we'll take a look. He takes a look in there, and he said, so Howard, you have the correct diagnosis. What we need to do, I'll run into town tomorrow morning. We'll get an expansion tank. We'll put it on there. That gives some breathing room for the pump to get going. And he said, there's some other issue with some of these fittings. I've got to swap some of them out. Have an electrician here because we got to check the draw on this thing. You don't simply plug and play half a horse into 3/4 horse. It's a plug and play that's not going to work. Different pressures, different settings. We've changed outlets. Let me pause here for a minute. I've been talking about some things, and I'm going to talk in a minute about the change from 120 volt to 240 volt and pressures and this and that. If I'm losing you a little bit because I'm lapsing into a bit of jargon or a bit of the technical aspects of this, that's where I was at a mere few days ago. I could not have iterated any of this that's happening. Yeah, I've been around equipment all my life and mechanical things and electrical things, and I know some of the fundamentals. Here's the deal. Everybody I'm dealing with are really attempting to be totally professional. Besides that, they're nice people. But we believe we should have running water on demand 24/7, 365 days a year. The equipment is complicated, and it requires specialized expertise. And I think some of our certificated experts are struggling, honestly, to keep up. And it's just an issue. And what this is all about, this is the first in a series of, so you really think you want to renovate a rural property? Hey, I'm just giving you a tiny little window into my life for the last year. A tiny little 3, 4, 5 day window. Imagine the panic going through me. Not outright panic, but yeah, panic. I've got kids here. I've grandkids here. We need this water. We have to keep moving, and then we need it for our own household. We're accustomed to running water. It changes everything in my day if when I crack the tap, water doesn't pour out. Okay, on to the next chapter of this little saga. The plumber says, look, Howard, can you call an electrician? We want to have him here so we can check the actual draw on this. Besides that, I want the electrician. We need to rectify, and the plumber knew enough about it that he said, you can't be running a 14 gauge wire on a 20 amp breaker. Get your electrician out here. Let's get this fixed. Let's get this onto 230 volts. When you go from 120 to basically 240, it changes the amperage required from 15 down to 7.5. Hey, I'm learning all of this stuff just in the last couple of days. So don't think I knew all of this going in. I wish I did, but I didn't. And so the electrician comes out. The plumber makes some changes. He puts that little expansion tank on there that Coral gave you a shot of a couple of minutes ago. And we change some stuff around. We put some new breakers into the panel. And we're now not operating on 120, we're operating on 240. And so we even put an on-off switch out here at the well, which has never been on here. And we flip the breaker in the house. I'm on my phone because the house is 200 feet away. The electrician's on his phone. I flip the breaker, and it lasts about 1 3/4 seconds, and it flips off. The electrician had a journeyman with him as well, and they had the meter on for the draw. The pump wasn't drawing 7.5 amps. It wasn't drawing 15 amps. The meter hit 54 amps. Now, some of you are going, I know exactly what's wrong, Howard. But that little what's wrong took 2 electricians and a plumber another 45 minutes of debate before we figured it out. The electrician went and double-checked everything, right from the breaker box all the way through a junction box, checked every wire to make sure it was secure, it was wired correctly, and he just said, I don't know. And the plumber says, you know what? Sometimes I've seen these things where you have to pull the end plate off the motor down here, nice tight fit, and inside there, you need to move a couple of connectors. Whoa, now there was a revelation. A little manual comes with the pump, and I'm dropping a couple photos in here. It actually says slide voltage switch to desired voltage prior to wiring. There's a little switch in there that has to be triggered. And meanwhile, what I've got is a qualified plumber saying, this is definitely an electrical problem, 100%. I've done everything right. And an electrician is saying at the same time, this is definitely a plumbing problem. There's a blockage here that's shutting down this pump and keeping it from operating. This is not an electrical issue. You have no idea my heartfelt gratitude that both parties were right here on the same property, on the same patch of ground at the same time, and I'm facilitating it, and they were getting along fine. Don't get me wrong, there was no animosity, but think about it. If I'd had the plumber out, and he goes, this is an electrical problem, and leaves, then I call the electrician, he shows up tomorrow and goes, this is a plumbing problem, and leaves. Wow, but they were both here, so there was total accountability. Pulled the cover, moved the switch, and we've had an abundance of water and I'm sure a ton of reliability for years and years and years to come. Okay, so what have I learned? What would I do differently next time? Well, in an ideal world, I would hire a pump specialist, somebody that did nothing but pumps, knows pumps. It would have saved me a ton of grief, a ton of angst, all of that stuff. But you know what? Have you tried hiring a plumber or an electrician lately, let alone a specialist? There's apparently 2 pump specialists in this area, and they're so busy, they're not even returning calls from voicemail or picking up their phone. They are absolutely slammed. Okay, there's more, much more. I could have gone into a full-blown hour of detail, but I'll spare you all of that. One of the learnings is when undertaking a project like this, I was just very grateful that I had a base of knowledge, that at least I had some credibility with the specialists that were on site. Next time, I'm going to view some YouTube videos about the subject matter so I can be a little more helpful in the process. And I think that's a critical skill to have, or that the skills necessary on a rural property probably require that I do a little more research. And number 2, this was only part 1 of Pump Purgatory. Simultaneous with all of this going down, I had a 6-month-old sewer pump fail in the rental suite of the house that is a second house that is also on this property. And that's the subject matter for a video that'll be released in the next week or so. Stay tuned. There's just tons of fun here at Kettner Creek Farm.